Guest filmmaker and visual journalist Nathan Fitch joins us live via Skype. Nathan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Fitch is going to be speaking with us today about his award-winning documentary, Island Soldier. And Fitch is also going to maybe talk to us a little bit about some of his other award-winning work that's been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Time Magazine, and NPR. But let's first start off by talking about Island Soldier, your first feature-length documentary, which is about the people from the island nation of Micronesia serving in the United States military. Let's start off by you just telling us a little bit about the film itself.
Sure. So I came to it. I was in the Peace Corps after I finished undergrad, and I lived on an island called Koshrai, which is about 42 square miles near the equator. So kind of in between the Philippines and Japan, or in between Hawaii and the Philippines, rather. And so I kind of lived in the community for 2 years, did everything with a family, was adopted by a family. And as over the course of the time I was there, I watched as young men and women were recruited into the U.S. military, left, went to Iraq or Afghanistan, and then came home. And I guess Island Soldier was kind of inspired by seeing the changes that took place in them and being curious about what it's like to go from one of the most remote, peaceful islands in the world to war and come back again, like what that journey is like. So that was really the question that the film kind of set off to explore.
And the film is beautifully done, so congratulations on that aspect. Talk to us about the process of this, because you really take an in-depth look at the people involved in this, and you're not just looking at them from a home perspective. You're really getting very intimately involved in these people's life, and in some aspects, their death and the emotional toll that takes, and you follow them along. Talk to us about the process of making this film and the journey that it took you on.
Sure. I mean, so as a documentarian, part of my job is to show up and film things, right? But in situations where it's life or death and things are more intense, you really have to have the relationships kind of lined up in order for people to trust you when you show up with a camera. And I think that the intimacy and the access that was granted to Island Soldier, to the production, was really predicated out of those 2 years that I lived in the island, live with a family. I speak the language, pretty well, I'd say. And so when I came back to make the documentary, people were really open to it because they had seen me for years. And I went back, actually, when I was living in Providence in 2010, I got a grant. And so I went back in 2011 and did another project. So I've kind of been going back and forth. But it started off, I just bought a plane ticket and flew to Micronesia and shot some stuff, and didn't really know what I was getting into or kind of how to make a feature-length doc, but just kept on going. And yeah, so it's been a challenging project, but a really rewarding one. And yeah.
It's very thorough. Talk to us about why you felt it was important to do this. Some people might not. I mean, you really do bring attention to the issues at large here. Why was that important for you to do so? Some people might not even know where Micronesia is.
I think that gets at my kind of original motivation. Like as Americans, like, should we know who's fighting for us? You know, like there's another generation, like my grandfather, who sailed through Micronesia en route to fight in World War II. And I think for that generation, these islands had a little more relevance. Like Peleliu and Palau, a great number of American soldiers died taking the island. And so I think at that period, people had some sort of understanding of the relationships and the connections. And I think, you know, when I got back from the Peace Corps, I would tell people about the islands and no one had any clue, and much less a clue that people from these islands are volunteering and fighting in our military at higher rates per capita than we as Americans are. And I think that especially in kind of the current moment where it's sort of America's divided and there's like an America First movement, kind of understanding the sacrifice that people are making who are not U.S. citizens for our safety and security is all the more important, right? Like if people are not going to be allowed the same benefits, what is the morality of enlisting them and putting them in harm's way?
What has the attention been like from this, and from people that live within Micronesia, and then people who are going to see the film? So these people, they're not U.S. citizens, but they are choosing to go and fight for America. They're enlisting in the United States military. What has feedback been like for them from you bringing attention to any of these issues? What has feedback been like from them?
So we've been touring the film for the last year at film festivals. But I guess I would share with you two screenings that were really interesting that I did at the end of last year, that we did at the end of last year for the U.S. government, one for the State Department and one for the Department of the Interior. And it was really great to be invited into the, government buildings and be allowed to screen the film. And I mean, one thing that was kind of interesting was that a lot of the people in attendance were not, even though the Pacific was kind of the region that they specialize in, were not really acquainted with the story. And so I think that in terms of justifying making the film, I feel very clear that it was important that we do it because people just don't know the story very well. And yeah, the response was actually quite positive. For the screening at the Department of the Interior, we had two Micronesian soldiers do the Q&A with me, and it was really great to have their voices kind of amplified beyond the screen, because it was really important for me. There is like a colonial history of anthropologists coming in, or outside filmmakers parachuting in and telling the story of Pacific Islanders. And in the film, the narrative is entirely told in the voices of the Islanders, which was an important sort of decision for us as filmmakers. But even more than that, to have the soldiers watch the film and then be on stage and get to respond to it in real time was incredibly incredibly rewarding. And one of the questions that came out of the audience was like, why? Why are you guys enlisting? Why would you do that? And one of the soldiers talked about how his grandmother had been one of the first people on his island killed during World War II in a shelling. And then, excuse me, and then after this sort of difficult period of being essentially enslaved by the Japanese, the U.S. came in, liberated the people, that he felt this patriotism toward America. And I think that is something that most Americans wouldn't think about, that people from these very remote islands would feel some kind of connection to us.
I mean, that gives you goosebumps to be able to hear that, to feel that deep sense of patriotism generations removed. That's absolutely remarkable, and yet no other rewards being sound, right? Truly remarkable. I do want to continue kind of exploring this and talking about your movie being screened within the Department of Interior. Were you, I mean, people make documentaries for many different reasons, whether they want to bring attention to an issue, whether they want people to know about something, whether they want social change. Talk to me about what that was like for you to have a screening with the Department of Interior, how that felt for you, and then we'll kind of explore that a little bit more.
Sure. Happy to talk about that. But just one thing I'd want to add in before we go on is that the patriotism is very real, and that's a very real part of the motivation. But there is also an economic, angle that in a sense these young men and women can enlist in the military and make as much as the highest paid government officials on their island as a entry level recruit. So in some ways, it's the motivation and the narrative is kind of complicated, and that was part of the reason it felt like it needed to be a feature versus like a short documentary, because there's these different kind of motivations that are galvanizing these people into like enlisting at such high rates per capita. But for me, personally, it's incredible when you make something and then you get to see that if you get to see an audience affected by that. That's like one thing. As a human, I think there's like an ego within us all that like you work really, really hard on this thing, and then it's done and people appreciate it, and it's like an incredible feeling. But I think for the DC screenings in particular, knowing that the people there could actually change policy was a really kind of amazing experience, to sort of be in front of those people, see the film have an effect, and then since we've heard that the Assistant Secretary for the Department of the Interior has tasked his staff to look into the matter of veteran benefits for the island. So, in a way, the film could actually change policy, which is kind of an amazing thing that you create a documentary and it could change the world.
It's pretty remarkable. Did you ever have any idea or any intention that a film that you made could do that?
You have to hope. It's so hard to do this stuff. It's so much work, and you kind of, like especially with a feature, with short stuff, I feel like it's a little clearer to have like the arc and the film in your head ahead of time. But with a feature, there's so many moving parts. You kind of go into it and you kind of hope it all works out. But it's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think, yeah, I mean it's great that it's having this effect and it's being positively received. And yeah, not sure that answered, but
being able to make a social change is a pretty powerful statement for whatever reason you go into film and making a documentary, but it is pretty powerful. So congratulations to that. So you have recently, you've been showing these screenings. You were in Providence not too long ago, recently had a showing in Seattle. What comes next for you and for the film?
we are headed to Prague next week for a screening at a Human Rights Watch film festival, and then we have screenings coming up in Atlanta, San Francisco, and LA in the next couple months. And we're trying to sort out, our funding has come through Pacific Islanders and Communication, which supports films for public broadcast. So we're trying to figure out the TV strand that we can work with to get the film out into the world and reach an audience through a TV broadcast. So that's something we're really excited about and working hard at.
Okay, so you'll let us know then when we can see it not at one of these festivals.
Absolutely.
Great.
But I would just add that the screening in Providence was especially gratifying because the root of the project happened when I was living there, and having seen movies at the cable car, it was great to kind of be able to come back, screen it, and have local friends from Providence there.
And we do want to talk a little bit about this because, have lived here, there's always a Rhode Island connection. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned that you kind of developed or started working production on Island Soldier when you lived here. Talk to us a little bit about that. And then, of course, always a Rhode Island connection. It's my understanding the film's one of the producers and editor, Brian Chang, he's a graduate of Brown University, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean the origin of the film came while I was living in Providence, and I just got back from the Peace Corps and was kind of trying to figure things out. And my brother was at Brown, and I came through for a weekend and met a bunch of nice people, and they invited me to move in. So it was a very spontaneous circumstances that led me to living in Providence. But I was working with a photographer named David Wells, who lives on the East Side, and a photojournalist, multimedia storyteller. And I was telling him about this idea, and he was very encouraging. So I did a photo essay in Fort Carson, I believe in 2009, with him about the story, kind of an initial photo story, and then published that with a small magazine. But then had the realization that to really tell the story, 10 images isn't enough, that it really needs to incorporate the voices of the people and what that journey is like from these remote islands. So I kind of had that light bulb moment while living in Providence. And years later, I had moved to Brooklyn, and I'm part of a group called the Brooklyn Filmmakers Collective there, which is a workshop group that meets on a weekly basis to watch works in progress, scenes, brainstorm ideas for people writing scripts, different ideas. And I had screened some samples from Island Soldier a couple times and connected with Brian Chang, who was also a member of the Brooklyn Filmmakers Collective. And we had Providence friends in common and got to be friendly, and then was able to raise some money, and he came on as an editor and then came on as a producer. So it's been great to collaborate with him.
Always a Rhode Island connection. I'm glad it's a good Rhode Island connection.
Yeah.
Definitely happy about that. Well, congratulations to you, Nathan. We really appreciate you chatting with us today. Hopefully we can keep in touch, and I'm glad that there's always good memories in Providence. Please let us know again what you're working on, anything in the works for what's coming up next. I know there's a lot on your plate for this movie, Island Soldier.
I just got done pitching a new documentary I'm doing about a 91-year-old New Yorker cartoonist.
Cool.
So it's going to be half animated, but it's going to be lighter. I think it's going to be although the cartoonist got his start when he was in the Marines during World War II, so there is still that military connection. But yeah, in production on that and a couple other things. So
cool.
And yeah.
Cool. Nathan, thank you so much for chatting with us here today. I appreciate it, and keep in touch. Let us know how you're doing.
Thank you for your time, Molly. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All right, everyone, we're going to get set up here for our next guest on Go Local Live. We'll have more information, including links to Nathan's profile and how you can see Island Soldier. Please hang tight as we get set up for our next guest here on Go Local Live.